welcome to Ride to Success. Today, I speak with Andrew Vontz, a seasoned storyteller and the mind behind the Choose the Hard Way podcast. He shares the journey and philosophies that have shaped his life and career. With over 25 years of experience, Vontz has carved a unique path through journalism, podcasting, and strategic consulting, showcasing a remarkable ability to adapt and evolve. Before we get into the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, please remember to subscribe and leave a review. It helps us immensely to grow the podcast, and I'll be forever grateful. Now, back to the show. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to Ride to Success. It's such a great pleasure to have you here. I've been following your podcast, Choose the Hard Way, for a long time, and
Awesome.
I'm an avid listener. So it's a privilege, really, to have you here and to be able to really dive into what ticks you and like your journey through from journalism to where you are now.
Yeah.
So there is a quote that you mention, I think is on your LinkedIn, where you say, progress is not a linear path and the road to achievement is rarely the highlight reel you see paraded on social media. And I think that really encapsulates some of the work you do, and specifically the work you do with the podcast, Choose the Hard Way. But I wanted to kind of take a few steps back and look at how you started, because you are, and you have been, when you started your career, I believe, a very accomplished journalist. And where did that passion for storytelling, where did that came from?
Yeah, I think I've always had a passion for storytelling from the time I was a little kid. I was actually thinking about this today. One of my earliest memories, my mom taught writing at a college in Kansas City, Missouri, where I grew up. And I remember getting sick one day in maybe kindergarten, and my mom bringing me in to the class with her because she couldn't get a babysitter or whatever. And sitting there and kind of, it's, when you're a little kid, you're kind of shy about that kind of stuff. But yeah, storytelling is something I've always been interested in. And I don't know why, but from a young age, journalism really fascinated me. So did fiction. Like, I just became kind of fascinated by the lives of novelists, which perhaps seems like an antiquated thing at this moment in history to be fascinated by. But yeah, as a young person, those things fascinated me. And, when I was in high school, I worked on the school newspaper at Rockhurst High School, the Prep News, and the teacher who ran that program asked me to apply to be the editor-in-chief my senior year, which really shocked me. At that moment in time, I'd actually, I think my first year that I was doing the school paper, I won a bunch of citywide journalism awards. I won an award from the Kansas City Star, which was the local newspaper in Kansas City. But I don't know. I just didn't have the confidence to apply for that role. But the teacher, Mark Bubalo, who's a really important mentor and figure in my life, actually, when I look back, he encouraged me to apply to be the editor of the school paper, which I did. And that's kind of where I got that journalism bug, which I think later led to me pursuing that professionally. And then in between there was a point in time when I wanted to make movies, kind of got into that in college. And then I ended up getting an MFA in creative writing. And while I was doing that, a colleague of mine who I've had on my podcast, his name is Chris Munoz. His DJ name is Night Stalker. He's a really big drum and bass DJ internationally, and really big in the LA underground scene. But when I was in grad school, he was doing a bit of freelancing for Vice. This was in the late 90s when Vice was kind of a new thing. So they were a new thing. It was before they'd become a multi-billion-dollar company, and far before they had wiped out and became worth almost nothing, as we've seen recently. So I was like, I hadn't really considered doing that professionally, and relative to some of the other things that I was doing at that moment in time, I did a little bit of I was a spin class instructor for about 3 classes at World Gym in Burbank, California, before getting fired for playing music that they didn't like at the gym. So I was like, I got to do something else. Yeah. I don't know if we have any metal fans out there, but I played Helmet in one of my classes, and I think some early Metallica, and I don't know, it's maybe not the vibe people at that point in time were looking for in a spin class.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But now when you think about it, like when spinning heavy metal, it can go together.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think I
yeah,
was
why
just
not?
ahead of my time. I could have been a huge Peloton instructor or something. But anyhow, that's
Yeah.
kind of where the beginning of my professional
Mm. hmm
journalism career kicked off, and that's how being a professional storyteller, while I was getting my graduate degree in creative writing, I started making a little bit of money writing stories for Vice, and then from there I went more fully into journalism, and that's what I did professionally for about, I think, about 12 years full time. I was doing that once I left graduate school, before I jumped over to the brand side of things.
And you mentioned spinning. Was from what I know of well, your background, you are always kind of seem to be always involved in some kind of sports. Was sport did play a role in your earlier life? Because now obviously it plays a big part with racing, with gravel, with bodybuilding. But did it play still a big part growing up?
Yeah, definitely. The time and place where I grew up, Kansas City, Missouri, and the 80s and 90s, really
Mm,
the big thing there was football. The high school I went to,
yeah,
it's an excellent school academically, and also it's pretty famous as being a school that produces a lot of Division I football players, and actually, like, I had kids in my class who went on to play in the NFL. Um, that was not
yeah.
my thing. It's not what I wanted to
Mm,
do. It's not really what my body was built to do at that moment in time. It was pretty small for my age, and I was quite young for my class always in school. I just became really fascinated by cycling at quite a young age. I always loved, like, BMX freestyle, the magazine Freestyling, for anybody who was around in the 80s, BMX Plus, stuff like that. So kind of like really early on, actually, there was this weird confluence of my interest in the building of myths around sports figures with cycling through those kinds of magazines, and then also magazines like Thrasher, Transworld Skateboarding. I was quite into skateboarding when I was a kid,
yeah.
and skateboarding
Mm,
and BMX, that kind of thing, not real big where I grew up. But I kind of connected with some other kids who were into those subcultures. And over time, I became aware through a family friend, a friend of my mom's, Pat Twinner, was doing triathlons like in the mid 80s, before any other human I knew was doing that. And again, it was just like a real peculiar thing to be doing in Missouri at that
yeah.
moment in time. Now it's like, I don't know, like, can you even be an executive and not do an Ironman, or be an ultra runner? I'm not sure. Like, you can't really swing a stick
Well,
without hitting one of those people. But yeah, it
I
was a
think it's
little,
the rite of passage now. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, and so she was into cycling and was kind enough to take me and her son, who was my age, Kelly, and a couple other friends out on some bike rides. And I remember going out, like, on, my mom had a hybrid bike that my dad got her for Mother's Day one year. It was a pink Schwinn Murata,
Mm,
was the model. I have a photo of it actually that I could send you.
sure,
Maybe
sure.
might be a funny thing to use in the episode promo. But yeah, like, I went out on that bike, and I just kind of became really fascinated by the lore and mythology, specifically of cycling. Of course, it was around that time in the mid to late 80s that Greg LeMond
Of
was,
course, yeah.
like, rising to prominence, winning the tour, of
hmm
course, again in 89. And that's when I got really into riding geared bikes and started spending
Mm,
more time doing that. So it was a great way always just to experience freedom and to get out and
mm,
explore the world, get out to some areas of the city and the country that I'd never been
yeah,
to, and also just to get some headspace and have some fun with friends, and
definitely,
to
yeah.
get out there by myself. So I kind of became really interested in cycling around that time, and it's something I've been doing ever since.
I mean, yeah, with you give a kid a bike and you give them freedom to explore. So like, but it seemed like you are also getting into the sport of following Greg LeMond, because I guess
Yeah.
with Greg LeMond, at that time there was more prominence in USA, like for road cycling at least. So
Yeah.
it's like everything, it got the momentum going in that
Yeah,
sense.
totally. And
Mm.
then, and then mountain biking started to get popular, and I had even more fun doing that. We had a great grassroots mountain bike race series around the state of Missouri. My parents are amazing people and were always very supportive of me being involved in cycling and helped me to make it happen. And, my mom used to drive me around in our family's minivan all over Missouri to go out and do these bike races in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was awesome. They were really supportive. And that's what I would do during the summer. I would mow lawns, and, I didn't get my driver's license until, I didn't turn 16 until my junior year at high school. So I was getting around on my bike a lot, and my mom would drive me around to these races in the middle of nowhere, which was fun.
sounds like I mean, it sounds like a very active adolescence. Like, yeah, I can totally relate. Not, I didn't. My sport was swimming at the time,
Yeah,
as in my teens. So yeah, I can relate. My parents having to drive me to go to do races and training.
sure.
So yeah, I can totally relate to that. I mean, so I will pick up again on the cycling aspect, because it's kind of a narrative that extends through until today. But I wanted to take that back to, so with the journalism, how did you come to work? Like how the transition happened from um, working in journalism to working in TRX and
Yeah.
Strava. Was that like, were you trying to align your interests in cycling or in fitness and trying to align with your work?
Yeah. I wish that, yeah, it's, like everything in life, and kind of going back to that quote that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, the idea that progress is not a linear path in
Mm.
life, which for some people it is. For some people it's just like everything goes up and to the right. That's awesome for them.
Well,
And,
for them, yeah.
yeah, and for other people it's not. And even, part of what I really like to do on my podcast, and part of what I think is cool about this conversation, is you start to get a little bit behind, what you might perceive to be true when you look at someone's
Yeah,
resume, or you see them on LinkedIn, or read about them, or hear them on a podcast, or whatever the case may be. And I think I love storytelling. Just as a for example, like with getting into journalism, just to jump back a bit before we talk
yeah, yeah.
about how I got into um, TRX, which I think is an interesting story as well.
Sure.
But with journalism, when I was in graduate school, I was at CalArts, which is a great art school outside of Los Angeles.
Yeah, yeah, famous one.
You might know some of the alums
Yeah.
like Pee Wee
Mm.
Herman, Don Cheadle.
Mm.
Yeah, shout out Pee Wee, R.I.P. And at that time, like I really wanted to be a novelist. That was my aspiration. I wrote a novel while I was in graduate school. I had interest from a lot of top agents. I signed with the top agent,
Wow.
and anyone who's familiar with that process, like all other creative pursuits, it's incredibly competitive. And
Yeah.
getting close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, is an old saying. And for me, I got really close. I had a great agent. My novel went to a top person at a publishing house. There was a high degree of interest, and they didn't buy the book. And
Right.
then no one else bought the book. And I had been doing journalism work just as a means to support myself. And at that moment in time, I thought, oh, maybe I'll write another novel and give this another shot. And in the meantime, I discovered that I really loved journalism. And the thing I loved about it specifically, as it related to storytelling, um, to as a craft and as a practice, was as opposed to writing fiction, it got me out in the world. And I'm both, I think, highly introverted and really value and enjoy and crave time by myself. And I also am highly extroverted and I really love being around people, and I get a lot of energy in particular from like having discourse with people, exploring ideas. And I especially, as a journalist and even now, I really loved exploring new and different cultures and subcultures and going really deep and understanding how do these things work and how are these mythologies or stories built. And that was something I loved doing as a journalist, even in an early stage of my professional career. So I tried to find a way to make that the focus of what I did. And what I ended up doing as a journalist, I realized over time after doing it for more than a decade and meeting a lot of other journalists, was quite unusual, which is I started out freelancing. I briefly worked at a cycling magazine called Mountain Biking for about a year. And then I started freelancing full time. And I basically freelanced full time for about a decade. I wrote for a lot of different outlets people might have heard of, like Rolling Stone, Spin, Outside Magazine, all the cycling magazines, most of the men's magazines. Did a lot of writing for the Los Angeles Times and the Los Angeles Times Magazine. But I wasn't focusing in one really hyper specific area of subject matter. Instead, my work was really organized around an exploration of people, places, and things at the limits of human experience. So that's what I found to be interesting. That's where I tried to focus all my activity from business development or pitching point of view and research point of view. And then over time, that is more or less what I became known for as a journalist and what people would seek me out for. And something you have to do to be, I think, to be just to have a viable career in that, which I think is becoming harder and harder and harder as we've seen journalism contract. It's been an especially rough week this week with really massive layoffs, like actually at the Los Angeles Times, at the Wall Street Journal, at a lot of other outlets. But you have to have really great people skills. You really have to understand social engineering. You have to understand motivational interviewing. You have to be able to do elicitation and get information from people, and sometimes information from people that are not highly motivated to share that information with you.
Yeah.
And the more unique and differentiated the information, and the greater your ability to synthesize and package that information in a differentiated way, the better you would do professionally. And later in my career, I realized, I had never gone in-house and been on staff anywhere. And so it was, every dollar that I earned for more than a decade, I was going out and selling something or developing my reputation to a point that someone would knock on my door, and that's how I was getting work. So in the process of doing that, I came across this former SEAL Team 6 Navy SEAL, Randy Hetrick, who had started, they had a really interesting product. I honestly, when I initially talked to him on the phone, I just couldn't even conceptualize what he was talking about, which is interesting because I feel like you can't walk into a gym anywhere in the world in 2024 and not see a TRX. It's like an ubiquitous product that's probably one of the best known fitness and wellness brands in the world now. But at that moment in time, nobody knew what it was. My younger brother was an elite rugby player. That's how I got connected to Randy randomly. And I did a workout with Randy, and I was living in LA at the time. And we did a workout down in Santa Monica, where the rings are for anybody who lives on the west side of LA. And it was like a complete beatdown. He really wanted to show me that this thing could give you a great workout, and it did. And so I published that story. It was one of the first stories that was published about the product. It was for Outside Magazine. And I started to have a dialogue with Randy. He was pretty early in his venture. And pretty quickly, he really tried to persuade me to come to work for him. And, fast forward a couple of years, and it started to make it started to feel really compelling to me, because at that moment in time, I was loving what I was doing. Also, there was the financial crisis of 2008.
Yeah.
Probably 50% of the outlets that I wrote for went out of business. So,
Oh, yeah, that's crazy.
yeah, like literally half the magazines I wrote for went out of business, or they had half the page count that they had 6 months
Right. Yeah.
earlier. There just weren't ad dollars. The economy was messed up. And I also was increasingly having this feeling that I was ready to take on a new challenge and learn to do some new and different things. And I was really interested in being part of a really high performing team of world class people working towards a common goal, and, you know, being a subject matter expert and applying my expertise in a new and
Of
different
course.
context. And you know, again, I think this is one of those things that, is I'm talking about it, if I were listening to this, I might think like, wow, that sounds so cool and linear. And, you know, Pedro, that was actually a really scary moment for me, you know,
Okay.
because I had like quite a
Yeah.
successful journalism career. It was starting to become really uncertain. How am I going to sustain this? And a door was open, and I was like, you know, do I walk through this door now? And
Yeah.
what does that mean or not? Will this be fulfilling or not? Am I never going to do the kind of like truly pure creative work or work with journalism that I
Mm.
really love? Like, is that done for me? And I decided to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to weigh down the options, but at that time, you have the experience as a journalist. You're not going to lose it. But again, you're saying about losing, I guess, that creative space that you might. It's a leap of faith. I kind of, yeah. It's, in some regard, I've been there in transitioning careers into marketing. It involves retraining and involved just trying to restart from the bottom and trying to work my way up again. It's a scary. It's a scary, and I can relate to that because it's not. It's changing careers or changing a role that takes you out of your comfort zone. It requires courage, and drive as well, because you have to stick to it for a while in order to assess if it's going to work or not.
Yeah,
There's
totally.
a,
And I
hmm,
also think, Pedro, that you're right. Like, you're not, it's not like you no longer have the skills you had in the thing you did before. So I still had the skills that I had developed as a journalist. And also, you know, in all areas of our life, I feel like luck always plays a role. You know, you have to make your
hmm,
luck and put yourself in a position
yeah, make
to
you like, yeah.
make a connection,
Hmm,
meet a person, encounter an opportunity. And with something like journalism, or, you know, like whatever it is, I don't know, somebody out there might be a professional musician right now and they're thinking about going into some related or adjacent discipline. You can always go back to it. And there, I mean, one of
yeah.
the risks of walking away from something is you're losing all of your momentum. And I think
Hmm,
something that a lot of people find in life is when you leave one domain and start doing something else and you take a leap, you might think that you're going to have total portability of all relationships and network that you've built in one context, and it's going to just plug into a new context. And I think the reality is often part of that network is going to port over, and some people are going to become net promoters of you as a person and a brand, and other people,
hmm.
it might turn out you just have like a much more transactional relationship with them that only exists in one context. And that's neither good nor bad. That's just how life is. So there is
Yeah.
always some risk when you walk away from something, and you can always restart later. So it's not really something to be afraid of.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting. There's always the people that support you and believe in you. And you call them net promoters. It's a very interesting term. It's like very. I guess Curl relates to marketing very well.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, yes, the people. Sometimes you kind of you are in a group. and that like doing a hobby, people like you because you are in that group. But then once you stop that hobby and move on to something else, that those people might not like necessarily care that you go somewhere else and they stop talking to you. It's like there needs to be a stronger relationship, a stronger bond to be able to, for people to understand that you are just like evolving, I guess.
Yeah,
Moving,
completely.
evolving. So as you evolved to TRX, as you kind of made that leap, so how did that transition came about, and did that align better with the kind of, did you grew accustomed to the kind of the brand vision, and as well the where they were going, because obviously you were interested in and you were developing an expertise in exploring stories that were kind of to people in the edge of their capabilities,
Right.
and in some way you kind of are with TRX, further down the line, and with Strava you are somehow working as well in that area, people pushing
Yeah.
themselves, taking themselves outside the comfort zone through different various disciplines. But there is kind of a kind of a link there that
Yeah.
is working. So can you just talk a little bit more about your experience at TRX and how that evolved then to, well, as you progressed your career into Strava as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I didn't mention this, but another really primary motivator for me in going to work for TRX, and again, this kind of only became apparent to me in retrospect, because I think at the time I had an intuition, and I definitely had a really high degree of interest in just high performance generally in sport and other domains, whether that's psychology, human factors, uh, but as well as like high performance in the context of physical performance. And I saw what Randy was doing with TRX, and just based on my understanding and interest in exercise physiology and things I had explored as a journalist, I just could see Randy's vision
Potential.
for where
Mm.
training was
Mm.
going. And that's when functional training it was just at the beginning of becoming a mainstream popular thing. And just the methodology that they had developed, the tool of the suspension trainer, which I still put my hands on every day, and I have for probably 20 years at this point. I just find it to be an amazing, incredible tool that I have made part of my movement practice pretty much every day of my life. And it goes with me when I travel, it goes with me everywhere. So I thought, okay, this is an incredible tool. It looks like they're ahead of something. Like, culture is going to move in this direction. Commerce is going to move in this direction. The business of sport and performance and health is going to move in the direction of what they are doing.
Yeah.
So, I kind of like the pattern recognition I had as a journalist to see things that I thought people would be interested in a couple of months was a highly valuable skill. That's how you sold stuff when you're a journalist. Because if you're talking about something people already know everything about,
Yeah.
especially with what I was doing, like, you're not selling the story. So I was like, okay, this looks like a really interesting thing that could become highly valuable. And then in addition to that, with Randy's background in the SEAL teams and the work that TRX did from the very early days with the military, and given that at that moment in time, the United States was in the midst of the global war on terror, and the work that they were doing was directly contributing to helping U.S. service members be mission ready and to stay safe downrange when they were doing their jobs in theater. And like, there's a big part of the company's business for a long time was working with the military. So those things all felt to me like I had great mission alignment. I thought they were doing something good in the world, both for civilians and for service members. And,
Mm-hmm.
I also really liked that it was a tool that, someone of any level of fitness ability, you didn't have to be an elite special operator in the military. You didn't have to be a UFC fighter. You didn't have to be in the NFL. And those were all contexts where the product was being used. It could help someone, who had like challenges with mobility. It could help people who were 85, 95 years old. It could help really young people. I actually pretty early on at TRX was working with someone from the SEAL teams who had been blinded by a sniper, and it was the way that they could work out after that injury. And Randy worked with that person to help them learn how to train again using the TRX. It's like, this is an amazing tool. They're doing good things in the world. Yeah. And then to get to your question of like, what was it like once I got inside? I'm someone who at that point in time, I had never walked into a building and sat down at a desk in my entire professional career, like not once.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So like freelancing full time.
Yeah. So I was like, I think I was 12 or 13 years into my professional career. I did a bit of temping briefly when I was in graduate school. So I probably had, had my ass in a seat for some small number of days. And when I did it, I was like, man, this doesn't really work for me. I'm not somebody really like sitting at a desk, honestly. Is anyone who's worked with me at TRX or Strava knows I didn't spend a lot of time at a desk. It's not where I was productive. So anyway, honestly, that aspect of it, I found to be, it just was weird to me to walk into an office and sit at a desk. And again, there are probably a lot of people like, man, this guy's a weirdo, but that just was like a new and different experience for me.
I mean, why not?
Yeah, totally. But there were a lot of aspects of the work that I really enjoyed. I met some amazing people that I'm still great friends with today. And I got to learn this entirely new skill set, this new lexicon. And, it turned out I had a really high degree of interest in business and the business of brand building, of marketing, of communications. And story is really foundational to everything that you do as an individual, in your family and your community, and in business. Like, whether you think you're a professional storyteller or not, you're a professional storyteller. It's just like, are you aware of that? Number one. And number two, how good do you want to get at it? And number three, what are you willing to do to be great at it or not?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's very true. I mean, everyone, whether they know it or not, I mean, it's like communications, friends, family, you are sharing a story. You are taking part in that. It's just natural. Just natural. And I think with any brand, the brands, probably the most successful brands, are the ones that recognize that's something that is very important to invest in and be able to tell a story that resonates with consumers, because that's how you're going to interest them, raise their attention to what you're doing.
That's right. And I think that is absolutely true. And the world's best brands actually become myths, and they become myths that are so powerful that people on their own will go out and propagate that myth on behalf of the brand without even knowing that they're doing it. So if you can get to the level of proficiency as a communicator or as a team of communicators within an organization where you have built an idea that's so powerful and so transformative for people that when they come into contact with your story, they feel such deep resonance that they'll turn around and tell all of their friends about it and their family, and they'll rave about it, then that's when you've truly accomplished your mission as a communicator, I think.
Oh, for sure. That's the gold dust. I mean, you have when brands can create that story, they can create a message that inspires, resonates, and empowers people. That's when you have people that coming to you like they want to be part of this story. They want to be part of this journey, and we can it's it's really kind of communication. It's a underrated skill. I speak English and I speak Portuguese, and yeah, it's kind of having that versatility is great for me, but it also makes me kind of sometimes feel like I don't express myself very well in one language other than the other one. So it's you kind of, once you start learning more languages and how you express more in other means, it's kind of, you start to see that there's things that you can improve, like, and great communicators are experts at just succinctly putting a thought into your mind and you just like run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you think about within the context, for example, of a tech, like what would be called like a technology company or a tech company. And, I've worked with a lot of incredible software engineers, and whether someone's a software engineer, they're working in communications, media relations, they're the CEO of a company, or you're a professional musician, each one of those individuals is a storyteller. A programmer might be telling a story through the code that they write, and that code can help people unlock their potential in different dimensions. It can create tremendous economic opportunity, and there are other types of communication that you have to do in every role. Or like as a CEO, you're creating a mythology and a story about the direction and momentum of the business, and you're getting the world bought into that idea. You're getting your employees bought in and excited. It's just an incredibly powerful skill to have. And whatever you're doing at your job, like one of the most important things that you're doing is communicating.
Yeah, yeah. I guess a lot of problems can boil down to how well you communicate with other people. If you are able, marketing one being one, but any sort of business you do comes down to communication. How well you are able to communicate your ideas to other people. That's it, boils simply down to that. But you're very right in saying that it's just everyone has a way of doing it, but there are better ways than others.
Maybe. Yeah.
So I think there are. I think there are. um, you have been working at TRX for how many years did you work at TRX?
I was at TRX, I think, for about 4 years and change, maybe a bit more than 4 years. Yeah.
Mm. And was that a time where like you thought, I'm ready for a new challenge, I'm ready for move on to a bigger company, or just shift?
Yeah. At that moment in time, so I was the head of content at TRX. So I was overseeing all of the content and communications. So media relations, public relations, all the content going into our different digital and physical products, all the content for our education, just because professional education for trainers and coaches was a huge part of TRX's business. And
Of
then I
course,
also
yeah.
was overseeing all the content going into marketing, e-commerce, sales, all that stuff. It was a really fascinating job. I got to work with some really talented people. And also at that moment in time, I was living in the Bay Area, and I was at TRX, I think from 2010 to the end of 2014, maybe early. Yeah. And so during that moment in time, like around 2010, 2011, tech starts to totally take off. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah.
highly noticeable to me, but it started to become more noticeable. The city started to transform. The tenants in the building that we were in the financial district, there started to be a couple of startups in there. I was like, oh, these people, they have like a giant graffiti mural on their wall and a keg. This looks interesting. And the thing that really started to fascinate me was what was happening with hardware and wearables. And that was when there were wearable companies like Misfit, Fitbit, Garmin. I was using a Garmin on my bike. People were wearing Garmin
Yeah.
watches. And so that was the thing that I was like, oh, I'm really curious about this wearables thing. I participated in it was like a health and wellness technology hackathon called HackFit. And that's where I met a couple of other individuals, including my friend Aaron Burby, who was really interested in the same things. And I just started to feel like, my gut was telling me and my interests were carrying me in the direction of, I really need to do something in this like wearables, tech, human health, wellness, performance space. And that is what began the exploration that eventually led me to go to Strava.
So how is it? How does it work? Were you like just curious, or how does it work? Like hackathon? Like, were you actually coding, or was it? Was this event just?
Oh
Can you
yeah,
please
totally.
explain what it
Yeah,
was?
totally.
Because I'm just interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really cool. It was just like it was kind of like a mashup of if you had like a business model competition with a bunch of MBAs, a hackathon with
Right.
software engineers and designers doing UX, UI stuff, and then people who had a deep interest in health, wellness, and performance. So that was part of what was cool about it. And also what's really interesting about the Bay Area, and I feel now that we're in a post-pandemic world and there are people with those capacities and professional interests are in a lot more places than they were at that moment in time. You don't necessarily have to be in a major metro area
Yeah.
anymore, I don't think. But yeah, at that moment in
Mm.
time, it was just an event that brought together really it mashed up a bunch of different things in a unique and interesting way. So I think the team that I was on, I was from TRX. My friend Aaron was pretty much a management consultant. We had a couple of people from the world of venture capital. We had 2 software engineers, and I don't think we had a designer. And then, we didn't, of course, we didn't build a functioning product, but we built a mock-up of the product. We built a business plan. We, of course, built a deck. You have to have a deck, right?
Yeah.
And then, after I think 2 or 3 days of working on it, then there was a pitch off where every team in the competition got like 5 minutes to pitch their idea. And so that's what happened. And some
Oh,
people,
sorry.
some teams actually made visual demos of their product. Our product was actually targeted at a less tech obsessed, less tech savvy demographic. So it was targeted at people like 65 plus, and it was not going to involve software actually. So
Oh,
we didn't
okay.
have a mock up of an app at that moment in
Oh
time.
no.
Yeah.
So was that the event that kind of planted the seed, or where you were able to network and to meet people that were working at Strava, or
Yeah.
is
Actually,
that the kind of the where it started?
I think it was one of a number of things I was doing at that time that got me in the headspace of switching, going into an adjacent industry, because Strava
Mm,
wasn't the same thing as TRX. It was definitely
no.
adjacent though, right? So, and it was a confluence, as you mentioned earlier, of a lot of interests of mine, like building the myth of a brand or business, my deep personal interest in cycling. I was doing a lot of writing at the time. So I started to like get back into racing. I really hadn't raced
Yeah,
in quite a while at that point in time, but I got back into racing mountain bikes, and I was doing gravel. Like I went to Unbound, did the Unbound 100 in like 2013 was the first time I went and did that. I was doing a lot of gravel racing in
that's really
central.
early. Is that when?
Yeah.
Is that a few years after it started, or just?
I think it started I want to say it started in 2006.
Okay,
So
right.
it
I'm
had been
not
around for a
good with
minute.
dates.
Yeah, but it definitely was not what it is today. And I
Yeah.
had a high degree of interest in doing it. Again, going back to journalism, the reason I really was interested in going and doing that event was because I had written about Jeff Kirkovy, who was, he now works for Top Peak Ergon. And in the early 2000s, he worked at a bike shop in Iowa, and he was involved in an event called Trans Iowa, which was this like
Okay.
350-mile gravel race in Iowa that at the time I was like, these guys are just totally insane. I didn't know what they were
Yeah.
doing, but I was like, for a long time, I thought about this. I was like, that sounds kind of interesting to me. And then eventually I finally was like, I need to go try a gravel race. So that's how I ended up at Unbound in 2013. I thought the 100 was plenty. So that's kind of what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. We'll get back. There's a story to be told there.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up the kind of the part of the kind of your work at Strava, you grew the community while working at Strava. So I'm interested to share with my audience, share with the listeners.
Yeah.
What were the kind of the key opportunities that you saw when you started working in Strava
Yeah,
and
totally.
throughout the process, and
Yeah.
how did you kind of try to fulfill those opportunities and try to achieve what was the strategy behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that really drew me to Strava and deeply interested me when I applied for a job there, and I had a great friend of mine, Alyssa Behrman, turned me onto this job. She was working there at the time. She's like, "Hey, there's this gig that's open. I have been looking," and it's like, that sounds kind of interesting. And as I looked at Strava, the business and the brand,
were you using Strava, or was that
I had been using Strava. I would say I was dabbling in Strava, and one of the reasons I was dabbling was because I saw this opportunity. I felt like Strava could have encompassed at that moment in time. I was using it. I was like, this is interesting. I in particular like going out, and I wasn't someone ever who was like going out and chasing KOMs or that type of thing. I like to do my racing at that phase of my cycling career. I really like to go do races with other people. That's how I like to compete. When I was training, I was doing pretty serious structured training. I mean, as serious as you can get for a relatively mediocre amateur athlete like myself, but I took it quite seriously.
Yeah, so doing a structured workout.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was very serious about it. I was very focused on cyclocross at that time, and I was like racing Masters Elite cyclocross in the Bay Area and having a lot of fun. So I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. It didn't feel like it was specifically, it wasn't like my deepest area of interest in cycling. And I think what I saw was, because at that moment in time, Strava was in the low single digit millions of users. So like they hadn't gotten to 10 million users, which I'm saying that like it's no big deal. It's a pretty big deal if you can get more than 1 million users of your product. I'm just saying relatively, because when I joined, we were single digit millions. By the time I left 7 years later, when I decided to move on to focus on starting my own business, I was a communications executive there. We'd grown from single digit millions to more than 100 million athletes on the platform in 190 plus countries. We had really positioned ourselves as the platform at the center of connected fitness. And I had been part of the executive management team that had worked really hard with a great team to help the company become highly profitable and incredibly successful, which felt awesome. Now, at the moment in time when I joined, I actually, in my mind, I was like, I think that this company could become massively successful and incredibly popular. And it was at the time, but I was like, it just has this massive potential to unlock by broadening its definition of who it's targeted at, because it just felt like it could be a much more inclusive place for all types of active people. So I was like, this has really massive potential once you get past the initial core customer of the really core cyclist who's very quantitatively driven. And I still think today Strava is an amazing platform for that athlete. And over time, I've gone deeper and deeper now that I don't actually do races with other humans as frequently as I used to. I really enjoy some of the stuff that in 2014 I wasn't that into. I wasn't that into how fast is my time on the climb that I go out and do all the time in my training. Now I'm a little more interested in that. And I think that's part of what's cool about Strava. It's connecting to a community of like-minded athletes, staying in touch with your friends, in your country or around the world. Since I've lived in Maine for a couple of years now, and I have friends all over the place. And, I love seeing, oh, this is what my friend Eric in Costa Rica did on his mountain bike ride today, but
it inspires you and motivates you to like be active.
Yeah, totally. And I think that at that moment in time when I joined, I was like, particularly there was a product called Strava Metro that they were not heavily promoting at the time. And we did a lot with Strava Metro during my time there. Like an incredible team within the company was working on that. I was lucky enough to get to be part of like a core group that helped to shape how we told the story of that product. And that amazing team really did some very high impact work by providing aggregated de-identified data and an amazing tool to navigate that data to city planners in the United States and around the world. And I think it's had a really material impact on people being able to commute on their bikes safely, which I think is incredible. So that was one of the things when I joined that I felt like, wow, this has like so much potential. And then I just saw the possibility of Strava serving many different types of active people instead of just like that really core roadie who it's like, again, like it's a really fantastic product for that really core roadie. And it's great for everybody else who just wants to be active and, be an active sweater with their buddies. Yeah.
I mean, for sure. I mean, the Strava is, you speak of Strava to anyone and the likelihood is that they will have a vague idea of what it is if they're not interested at all in fitness. It's kind of is coming, being active is people are noticing it. People that are not outside the core demographics that you were trying to target in the early days. So it just goes to show that they are being kind of trying to widen their reach, so to say. So I mean, you obviously you have been quite like kind of stepping up and building up your career. And so you mentioned before you wanted to leave Strava, you kind of wanted to have your own say, have your own business.
Yeah.
Is this where the podcast comes in? Is at what stage, what happens after Strava? Because I mean, you at this stage, I'm guessing you are highly successful at what you do. You are able to, you have been able to grow the companies that you've been working on. What drove you to want to pursue something that was personal to you?
Yeah. So to speak to the podcast part of it, I actually started the podcast maybe midway through my Strava journey. I started it in 2018. And the reason I've been doing Choose the Hard Way, which is my podcast. You can find us at choosethehardway.com, at HardwayPod on social, and look for us on any platform. And please be kind and hit subscribe and 5 stars. I'd really appreciate it. Helps more people find us in search. And I really missed my favorite parts of what I did as a journalist. I really missed. And what I missed the most was getting to spend time with some of the world's most interesting and high achieving people and getting to see what actually went into that. And to be honest with you, Pedro, that's not often what I could put in the stories that I wrote as a journalist, because my editors and readers wanted something else. They kind of wanted that version that you now would see on Instagram, right? Which is just, but candidly, like, it's primarily a bunch of bullshit. It's not what it actually takes to do what people are doing, and you're just seeing the highlight reel. So the reality, if you're as lucky as I am, having spent more than 25 years at this point with being around some of the world's very best performers in a lot of different disciplines, whether that's, I've gotten to spend time with people like Daft Punk, Samuel L. Jackson, the actor, people at the very top of their discipline in special operations, professional athletes, and like pretty much every professional sport you can think of. And what you see them do is incredible. And what it takes to do that is usually not what you're seeing on social media. So
No.
what I wanted to
Yeah.
do with my show was, and this kind of came into focus over time, but like number one, I really missed interviewing people. It just brought something to me as a human. It fulfilled my curiosity about certain people and topics. And then I also really wanted to connect people to stories from these individuals and hopefully give them the feeling to be inspired to go be the very best version of themselves. I didn't want to give people like, hey, here are the 10 takeaways from person X that you can apply in your life, which like that's totally fine. That's a great reason to have a podcast. And I think there are a lot of fantastic shows out there like that. What I wanted to do was just to have open conversations with people who I admired and was curious about, see where they went, and then ideally at the end of the day connect people to something that I've found to be axiomatic in sport, in my professional life, and with my family and in my personal life, which is uh doing hard things build stronger humans who have more fun. And in addition to
Yeah.
that, when you do hard things with other people and you have fun, which you often do, it's either going to bring you together. And that's a pretty amazing thing in life. So, setting big, audacious goals, going after them and going through some stuff with people to get there often turns out to be a fun thing. So that's how the podcast came about. And so I've done that now for 6 years.
Yeah.
It's an area of personal interest. And when I decided to leave Strava, I felt like we'd done some incredible things during my 7 years there. I built out a really amazing, thriving global communications team that was, we had people on 7 different countries, 5 different continents. We were operating 24/7, 365 days a year to build and defend the reputation of the company. I felt that
As you must. Yeah.
working with our partners in marketing and on the business side, I felt like we'd done a really amazing job of, as I mentioned, like building like an actual mythology that other people would repeat about the brand and business. And I felt like we were in really great shape. And, as I mentioned, um,
I mean, I guess, well, just to briefly pin that thought about Strava entering the mythology,
yeah,
not so much for people that just enjoy going for a walk or a brisk walk or just a leisure run, but in the dialogues that you have with more people that are, for instance, like myself, I like cycling. I enjoy going out on rides, and I wouldn't say I am. Well, I guess I could say the same as you did. Like, I'm a fairly mediocre kind of guy riding my bike. I'm not like I don't excel at it, but I enjoy it and kind of putting myself through pain. Mostly on climbs, it's kind of it. That's what can kind of drives me to want to get better at it. And to bring it back to Strava, that the saying, like, if it's not on Strava, it didn't happen. I don't know if I don't know if that's something that was like something they created within the Strava team, and then it was put out there and see if, but it's just to show that it is part already of the lexicon of people that enjoy sport, enjoy cycling or running, and they are really passionate about it as a hobby, primarily. So it's it just goes to show that sometimes there's those phrases that there's a brand, like the presence that he has on a person's life just goes beyond it. So just I wanted to pin that because I thought it was important to mention as well.
yeah, Pedro, I think that's a great point. At a certain point, the mythology takes on a life of its own, and people are just saying things like that amongst themselves with other cyclists, which is really amazing. And I did want to say something because I did describe myself as like a mediocre amateur cyclist. You kind of did as well. I would say though that I am world
Wait.
class at having fun on my bike, and I
Yeah,
bet
yeah,
you are
yeah.
too. And that's actually the most important thing. It's just
Yeah,
right. I
that's
think
very true.
it's pretty easy to think about everything through a competitive lens, but that's what I think is magical about just being physically active, participating in sport, whether you like to go out and do walks, hike, walk your dog, go swimming, ride your bike. I don't care. If it's something that makes you happy, that's awesome. And if you can be world class at being happy at doing that thing that you enjoy, then that's
Yeah,
awesome. So, I mean, to kind of transition to,
wise words, wise
yeah,
words.
yeah, I don't know, but so at a certain point, I felt like I've done what I wanted to do within the scope of my time at Strava. I felt like I'd built an awesome team that could, live on beyond me and operate at a really high level. And I'd gotten to be part of just an amazing executive team that had achieved huge things at the business and brand level. And I really felt like, wow, I want to apply everything that I've now learned in the trajectory of my career, and I want to start my own business. And
Exactly. Yeah.
so I decided to move on from Strava, and then one of my other Strava colleagues, David Lorsch, who I worked with really closely on the executive team, also decided he was ready to do something new. And he decided to move on. And we started to talk and we started to explore, how might we explore a new and different space that's kind of a confluence of everything that we've learned during our time in this space and in the span of our multi-decade careers. And, how could we serve people and help them to be, happier, healthier people?
Mm.
And so that's how we ended up creating our company, the Better Lab, which is, by the time this podcast drops, we will have our beta product will be public. People will be able to access it at thebetterlab.io. And yeah, so this is
So
our initial product. It's really oriented around a customer that's highly active today. So it's people who are highly interested in health, wellness, fitness. They're probably getting plenty of exercise, and they understand what the path is to do those activities, right? Like they know what
okay.
classes to go take, or if they're a cyclist or a runner or swimmer or whatever, they can go anywhere and get a training program. And it's kind of pretty easy at this point to figure out like, hey, what do I
Yeah.
want to do if I get better at
Mm.
these things? So I think it turns
So it's
out,
for the discerning person that knows exactly where they
well,
want to be, or
yeah, well, I would say just when we think broadly about people who are physically active, I think that there are great
okay.
solutions out there for them, right? So you can figure out like there are a gazillion places you can go to get a training program, or if you're just like, I just want to be fit, great. There are awesome apps for that. You can go to your gym, whatever the case may be. I think this same customer really struggles though with all of the other areas of health and wellness. And they also understand that the one thing that is a force multiplier that improves everything else is sleep. So, as a for
Mm.
example, like what's the ultimate pre-workout? Some people think it's taking 400 milligrams of caffeine. I actually would say it's probably getting a good night of sleep the night before your workout. That's what's actually going to give you a really amazing workout. So,
Sure. Yeah.
whether people want to have like a high level of cognitive performance so that they can be at their best at their job, or they just want great emotional health and show up for their family and friends, sleep is the one thing that unlocks all of that. It's also the one thing that you can do it's proven to help prevent injury and to help your body regenerate itself. So there's tons of content out there about sleep, like more than ever before. There are a lot of wearables that people use to track and observe what's happening with their sleep.
Yeah.
But what people don't have, and we honed in on this specific problem, is there's not really a great mechanism to help you get a personalized recommendation based on the very best science-backed practices that you might do to improve your sleep. What if we gave people a way to really quickly get a personalized recommendation and then put it into practice, one practice at a time, because that's what behavioral science shows us works, and do it in
Mm.
like a really low friction manner where people are getting the most out of their sleep and the time that they have. So we built a one-on-one AI supported coaching experience. It all happens through text message. So you go through this quick personalized intake process, and then you get started with your coach who's going to help you to build one personalized sleep practice at a time. And the end goal ultimately is that you want to be a healthier person, you want to feel good, and you don't have to do the work of going out and figuring out how do I wade through all this information out here to figure out what do I actually do. So these are like the very best proven practices that are relatively simple to do, but implementing them can be really challenging in the absence of some guidance and structure. So that's what the Better Lab helps people do.
Okay, yeah. So it gives you a kind of assistance and step-by-step information how to, well, sleep better, I guess. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it's actually, so it's an AI supported coach who helps you put it into practice every day. Yeah. So it goes beyond just providing you with information, and it's actually providing you with that AI supported coaching to put it into action and to stay on track and to know that it's working.
Well, that's sleep is definitely underrated. It's often underrated, especially in people that have a busy lifestyle, entrepreneurs. It's kind of sleep kind of gets, work gets priority sometimes over sleep, and that's. But as you correctly said, it's like it's kind of that you can call it like almost a superpower to having a great day, to be able to be at your best, be your best version of yourself as well. So yeah, it's interesting, and I'm interested to see how it's going to grow and to develop. So I'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm incredibly excited about the work that we're doing, and it's been really fun to do this with my partner David and our fellow co-founder Eric Shao, who's an incredibly talented engineer and AI and LLM expert. So it's just been a lot of fun working with this team, applying everything that we've learned throughout our careers, and serving a customer who really desperately wants to get better sleep and just doesn't know how to find the right information and put it into action.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, sleep is really, it's the ultimate force multiplier for every area of your life.
Sure. I totally relate. Sometimes sleep is not my strong is not my strong point. Sometimes I like it. So yeah, definitely interesting to keep an eye on it, how it develops. I just kind of wanted to, so obviously all of this shows your entrepreneurial spirit. You want to find the new thing, like try to always kind of evolve and progress, and that kind of also leans on your, from what this conversations that led me to understand, is your inquisitive nature, curiosity, but also kind of drive to evolve and progress, try to find out what is around the corner, and I think that ties very nicely with your podcast, Choose the Hard Way, because you speak with people that have done remarkable things and are doing remarkable things with their lives, whether in business, sport, many other aspects of in their careers. But I think like with over 6 years of interviewing these people, one of them that comes to mind, Joe DeSena, but there's another one that I particularly enjoy that episode. There's another one with Michelle Mace-Curran as like a fighter.
Yeah. She's amazing. She's amazing. Like, what a remarkable human being. That was just like, it's an amazing, what an honor to get to listen to those stories.
Well, I can say the same. It's just so it's like these people are the stories are not linear, and they are so inspiring because they involve perseverance, involve like shortfalls that then you can build up and success. And so success is not straightforward. So that's the point I'm trying to get to. So over this period of time, what do you have a standout person that you kind of like was mind blowing in your podcast? It's because I'm just interested, because I'm sure you get these questions a lot of time, because obviously you've spoken with hundreds of people, but I'm just interested to find out from you.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like my mind is blown every time I get to have somebody on my podcast or get to have, I mean, most conversations with most human beings, if you will take the time and have the presence to listen attentively, you know, everyone is a remarkable human being and everybody has an incredible story. And I would say the thing that's really jumped out at me in the 6 years of doing my podcast, and when I think back, not just on the 100 plus interviews I've done for my podcast, but the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews I did in my career as a journalist and that I've done over the past several decades, the thing that really emerges to me is that, you know, everyone is unique, right? Everyone has a unique story. And I think the most valuable thing that any human being can do, and if you're listening to this, I hope that this is something that you can put into practice in your life. If you're not already, it's you're writing your own story and you are not anyone else. And no one else has whatever your you-ness is, whatever makes you, you, Pedro, only you have. And I'm the only person who has the thing that makes me Andrew. And I think that what will serve all of us, and what I've seen from all of my guests, is there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of nonlinearity in how things happen. As it's unfolding, have confidence, have fun, and become the maximum version of whoever you are. That's how you can do truly great things, is to forge your own path and to become as differentiated as possible as a human being. Because to do extraordinary things in life and to be an extraordinary person, you have to do things that that only you can do, and that's for you to figure out, not someone else, and not by doing a copy paste of like whatever somebody else did.
It's very important. Obviously, everyone has a story to tell, and nowadays, unfortunately, with social media, people find themselves comparing to higher standards, or comparing to other people, and it's kind of, it just brings you down, because you're comparing to something that you can't be. And as you rightly said, you are unique. Everyone is unique and has their own ways of expressing themselves, have their own superpowers. I'm interested to explore a bit more about the podcast, because there's a few lessons that one can take from listening to your podcast, and obviously is how to be able to learn from other people's stories and try to, through their own ways, build their own path. What I mean, how do you see your podcast in terms of enabling personal growth to your listeners, to yourself? Is that something that was conscious when you started on this journey of podcasting?
Yeah, I felt deeply compelled to do the podcast, and I felt like I just had to do it. And this is just how it came out. And, you know, whether it has served its purpose, I hear from people send me messages and they tell me the things that they're doing, or perhaps challenging things they're going through, how they've navigated them, or ideas about who they think might be an interesting guest. And like, I appreciate all of that. And ultimately, for me, it's like it's completely served its purpose. And the ROI for me has been the people I've gotten to meet, like getting to have conversations like this, which, I don't know if we would have had this conversation if I hadn't put 6 years into making a podcast, right? Somehow who I am, and like we get to have this conversation, and like now I know you. Now I get to be at the beginning of this amazing journey that you're going on, and this incredibly brave thing that you're doing, which is like you're putting yourself out there, you're starting your own podcast. And to me, that's incredible and amazing. And like,
Thank you.
Yeah, that just blows me away.
I mean, well, you had to go through the same process. So it takes, as you mentioned earlier on the conversation, it takes courage. It takes you as well some degree of self-belief, because you need to be able to be invested into it. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I find it really remarkable how the story, again coming back to the power of storytelling, the stories that we hear from other people through their journeys, even as if we cannot completely relate to their story, we can take learnings from it. You can learn the power of perseverance, the power of the struggle, overcoming an obstacle, and looking at different tools to do it. So it's really kind of, it's a powerful. I recommend everyone that's listening to go to your podcast through the hard way.
Thank you.
I think they will find it very worthy of their time.
That's kind of you to say it. Thank you.
There's an aspect that we haven't touched a lot, which is the cycling aspect. You mentioned that you have raced and you like racing with other humans. And there's a few anecdotes, or not anecdotes, but funny stories that you have claimed 2 second places at Unbound 100 at the gravel race in America. And there was a funny story where, I don't know exactly the year, but where you tried to give advice to Peter Sagan on how to race Unbound. Can you maybe shed some light on that? Did Peter Sagan take you on your advice? And just give us a bit of more insight and on your experience of doing gravel racing, because I must admit, so I live in UK, and I have not yet dipped my toes in gravel.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm way behind the curve here. I'm a laggard. But so yeah, but can you just share about your experience, because you do
totally.
you do speak to a lot of professionals that are in the space, and you see as well what is happening in the USA with the gravel scene, and how it's taking the world of cycling by storm, specifically in the USA, but around the world as well. But at the time we're speaking, gravel is probably the best place for athletes or cyclists to make money. Is a more exciting place to be in terms of how the dynamics of the racing, but also the community that is building through the events. So yeah, just tell us a little bit about your experience, because there's a lot of things that I know, but probably my listeners don't know about that.
Yeah. And Pedro, I've been following the UK gravel scene a bit. I was doing some calendar creeping and looking at all the gravel events that are popping up in the UK, which look like they'd be a lot of fun. And part of me is like, how can I get over there and do one of those events? I used to spend a fair bit of time in the UK because Strava had an office in Bristol. I love the riding in Bristol and the surrounding areas. Who can, can you top the Cheddar Gorge? I don't know. But, also there's so many country roads and farm roads there. So I feel like I never actually had a gravel bike over there when I was spending time there. So part of me is like, it'd be incredible to get back over there and do some gravel riding. But yeah, I've been doing multi-surface or gravel riding for more than a decade now, and in like actual like official gravel events. Before that, I probably did all kinds of other stuff on my road bike off road, and the gravel racing scene in the United States, to me, it feels really similar to how mountain bike racing was in the United States in the late 80s, early 90s, including the transition that professional mountain bike racing made in the mid 90s to become a European dominated competitive discipline, which is pretty clearly going to happen within the next 12 months, I would say. Like we've got Mate Mohoric and lots of other top world tour athletes are going to be at Unbound this year. And Keegan Swinton I've had Keegan Swinton on my podcast. I think he's an incredibly talented athlete. I think he actually would beat most world tour athletes at Leadville because he's exceptionally talented at high altitude. I think world tour athletes are going to start dominating Unbound, especially now that I'm really getting into the weeds here, but they used to have the Unbound 200 the past couple of years. It's gotten more and more competitive. It's finishing at the same time that amateur cyclists who are more or less doing like a fun ride that's 50 miles are coming into the chute at the finish, which is it's very directly impacted the outcome of the race. And I think once we get those people into a different finish chute, which I believe will happen this year, that it's going to be a really different outcome. So I think that's great. Like I'm really excited to see world tour athletes enter professional gravel racing. I think that it's going to make it even more interesting than it already is. And just at the participant level, they're really fun events to participate in. Personally, events that have 1,000+ participants starting at the same time, it's not what I personally have a lot of fun doing anymore. I don't know, that's not the best, starting with like 1,000 people and then funneling into a choke point, and it just like gets real sketchy. But I like a lot of I kind of seek out smaller regional events. Where I live here in Maine, we had something called the Maine Gravel Series for the past couple of years. I'm not sure if it's going to be back this year. Those events reminded me of like my very favorite things about when I first got into racing mountain bikes. Relatively small fields, really interesting to put it mildly, courses where like you probably would do well on a 150 mil dual suspension bike for some parts of the course, and then other parts of the course a road bike would be okay. And that's part of also, I did a shorter distance BWR, Belgian waffle ride race in late fall last year. Those events are super cool. Yeah, just things that like really mix it up, have a lot of different styles of surfaces, trails, chunky stuff, road, where you really have to think about your equipment and do all of that calculus. Just like, hey, will my bike blow up before the finish? What do I run to not get a flat? I don't know. I find kind of the calculus of all of that to be quite interesting, and having to ride in such a way that you're going as fast as possible and conserving your equipment, and maybe running like heavier tires, for example, which would be a big no-no in road racing, stuff like that. So if anybody's listening and they haven't gotten out and done some of those events, number one, I would say like go sign up for one, and sign up with a couple of friends, going back to the idea that doing hard things builds stronger people who have more fun, and it's a lot more fun if you do it with some friends. Go do it. Like it's tough to beat for a good time. So so I love gravel. And as you mentioned, I've had a lot of competitors in the Lifetime Grand Prix in the United States on my podcast. I've had Kimo Seymour, who is the executive overseeing the whole Lifetime Grand Prix, and I've had Michael Marks, who is the founder and CEO of the Belgian Waffle Ride, and all really interesting human beings and with pretty interesting perspectives on what's happening within that community.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment gravel is here to stay, and is really a thriving space because it's like giving an opportunity, an outlet for for people that want to have a more relaxed environment, more of a community aspect to events, cycling events, and that's something that I speak from in UK, but you can add if you wish. That is that aspect where it's more relaxed, it's more of a kind of this gives more of a festival vibe to it.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of that adds that kind of family aspect as well. Like bring your friends, come and have a great time, sort of aspect. And that's kind of that's what you need, really. That's what you need for an event to be successful, for a discipline to evolve as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, so I'm interested in the. I think as we covered a lot of things, and clearly it shows you your passion or your entrepreneurial spirit. There is the question I want to ask you because it blends in nicely with one of the purposes as well of the podcast, which is, what does success looks like to you?
Yeah, to me, success looks like being present and aware to whatever is happening in your professional life, your personal life at any moment in time. Success looks like being in control of your attention. And I think ultimately success is being a molecule of water and not being the wave.
Interesting. So is that the being the molecule is as knowing your place in the world, or is that in regards to being part of a larger group of people, larger community?
I think it means that no matter what's happening around you, whether you're perceiving things as being incredibly challenging or being incredibly rewarding, that your inner state is level and yeah, you're in control of your attention and you can be present to what's happening without any judgment.
That's can be very difficult to achieve.
Yeah.
From my experience.
Yeah, I think it can be really difficult to achieve. And I would say on top of that, that it would be whether you achieve that state or not, it would be having non-judgment about how you're
Yes.
feeling as you're
Yeah.
experiencing it.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
very important. Yeah, being kind to yourself. That's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually, I would say, a critical point, which my podcast is called Choose the Hard Way, but is a really great friend of mine, Dara Harris, who's an incredibly talented high performance coach who works with the Toronto Blue Jays, the professional baseball team, always reminds me, gentleness is an incredibly powerful force. And especially when things are challenging, I think we all would benefit from thinking about treating ourselves more the way we would treat, like if you have a child, or
Yeah.
if you think of you yourself as a child, like falling and being hurt, how would you treat that person and be that gentle with yourself?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's very important. Yeah, because you are able to be, not be in control, but be aware of what you need, and how to speak to yourself. So yeah, food for thought here. Food for thought. So I think this kind of brings me nicely to kind of the end of our conversation, which has been very insightful. There's a lot to unpack here. There's kind of a tradition that I started under the podcast, which every guest leaves a question for the next guest, and you have the question from Ashley Passio, South African cyclist, very successful in her own right. And she left you this question.
Okay, this is cool. Surprise. I like it.
What can you do to make tomorrow better?
Breathe.
Very good. I guess it really tightly resonates with what you just said about what success looks like to you. Yeah, very good. I mean, that's brilliant. Thanks for sharing your experience. I feel kind of energized by our conversation.
I feel energized too. Yeah, I'm grateful to be here, Pedro, and I'm really excited to see where this podcast is going to go. And I'd love that question.
Yes.
See you later. Okay.
Well, it would be great if you could.
No, I'm not going to break the tradition. Okay.
Yes.
All right. I think I've got my question.
Okay.
What is essential?
Thank you, Andrew. That's been amazing. And yeah.
Awesome.
What a great conversation. Andrew's story is a testament to the power of perseverance and personal growth. It reminds us all of the importance of resilience and the limitless potential within each one of us. Now, make sure you tune into our next episode where our guest will be answering Vontz's question. Until then, take care.